Quisiera comenzar con un comentario político breve. Hablo como alemán y estadounidense. Vivimos un momento de violencia extrema. Tengo una incomodidad profunda con los contextos políticos de los que provengo y me acerco a esta conversación con respeto y admiración por los contextos en los que ustedes trabajan en España y en América Latina. Este libro intenta pensar más allá de divisiones establecidas, como entre naturaleza y tecnología, humano y máquina, y sí, diseño y política. La arquitectura siempre ya es política. La intención es contribuir a una conversación sobre formas de convivencia menos extractivas entre humanos y también dentro de un mundo material y maquínico compartido que esté emergiendo. Con esto paso ahora al inglés para desarrollar estas ideas con mayor claridad.
Gracias.
You understand I don't speak Spanish. I tried my very best. I hope you understand English much better than I can speak Spanish. This work was by a student of mine, Mais Abouali. So here these are pages from the book, and you see here Mais work on the left side. You saw the big picture here. This came about just this morning. It occurred to me that this might be a nice contrast to perhaps this picture. It is ultimately the book does not really distinguish so much between material argument and an understanding of artificial intelligence as materiality, and it tries to maybe point at the problem of keeping those strict distinctions. In my mind, it is precisely these distinctions or these that lead to fundamental problems like this, which is, for instance, expressed in this, what I would refer to as an authoritarian instrument. No, I wrote this a while ago. This was long before Jared Kushner and the American administration came up with the idea of imposing such a master plan onto the devastated land of Gaza. But I think it's the most clear, almost a cartoonish expression of where this could lead to. So part of the book is talking about material urbanism, and you mentioned it. Thank you so much, Juan, for this very comprehensive introduction. I forgot about all these things. I think this must have been a CV from a while ago, but it is in fact so that material urbanism was an approach to consider materiality as agentive, meaning that we don't look at material as this inert, passive stuff, but as part of a shared reality and shared materiality. So I just wanted to show this because all of these projects have an element of physicality and materiality to them, and all of them have a digital algorithmic, or in the last 4 years, what we now refer to as artificial intelligence component. I don't really care too much about the separation between even those computational domains, but it is true that since the advent of AI, one has a more palpable idea, almost in an anthropocentric way, that these machines do gain agency. And my larger point is that this is not something that we should be afraid of, but something we should embrace so that we can cultivate a more positive future with it and with them. And here we see, I just showed this on the top of two images, a physical model, and then a collage technique that mice employed to arrive at this image. I should say also, and these are other urban design students working with similar techniques, I should say so, and because this is a very intimate group, I could do that. Mais, who was a Fulbright scholar and a student of mine, is a Palestinian, and she identifies as such. She grew up in Jordan and now lives in the United States. And I really cherish the many relationships I've been able to form with students from all over the world. I think we have also a couple here in the call, Americans, Latin Americans, Middle Eastern, European, African, wherever they come from. One of the greatest privileges I find, and perhaps you have a similar situation in Madrid, Juan, is that we are meeting people from all over the world and get so many different perspectives on the matter, and also so many different perspectives on what is actually architecture, right? And what can architecture do? And I have to say very honestly that what it does in architecture academia in this country right now is perhaps somewhat limited, and it may be in every country. But I do know that there are times when architecture is not only in the business of quote unquote serving a ruling class, which at least here is often understood as a limitation. I want to give you an example. I was at a protest at my own campus, Pratt Institute, and other than students, there was only faculty from other departments, the arts and social sciences and everything but architecture. And so this colleague of mine looked at me almost like with a slight pitiful demeanor and said, "Oh yeah, the architects, they can't afford to speak out because they need to get their clients." I don't know if I make that point clear, and I don't want to be too critical. I don't want to be, only the sort of enfant terrible here, but these are things that I think matter in a very substantial way, and there's very few opportunities to actually discuss that, from my perspective, at least in everyday workings, both in architecture practice as well as, unfortunately, as well as in academia, though traditionally and historically, academia was always a space where those things were very much part of the conversation. And in the current political regime in this country, I am an American citizen as well as a German citizen. This in this climate, freedom of speech and academic freedom are really, I think, under attack, you could say. Maybe we have some friends from Germany in the audience as well, where this might be not so apparent, but in my understanding, there are certain forms of expression that are currently not allowed, actually illegal, and in the American context, that is the case anyway. It is very interesting for me if I follow Spanish politics, by the way, and in a certain sense, I'm very grateful that there's at least one country in the mainland Europe that does have a spine. So there's a lot of political talk. One more thing I wanted to say is that if you look at on the bottom, you see always where the pages are. So on page 135, this is the most explicit discussion of that topic from a slightly different end, not so much about urban design per se in the physical sense, but what's going on with social media. And I am sure that your students, as much as mine and also my own son, are extremely critical and careful with social media because there are many ways in which it affects particularly young people in a negative way. However, in this sequence or in this chapter or passage, which is about the potential of open AI, actual open AI, not the company, but openness in AI, it makes a parallel to maybe the promise of the early internet, the promise of democratization and the promise of, equal access to information and education. And in this passage, I make this point that since I started with the Middle Eastern discussion, that 2 years ago there was a completely different public opinion on the matter in this country, and I believe in most of Europe as well. At least I think I can say that for Germany. And the public opinions have radically changed. I think now I feel comfortable to speak about this. 2 years ago, I had to be extremely careful. So now that's it. Let's put the politics a little bit to the side, even though, as I said earlier, in my broken Spanish, it all is already that, right? So let's go to more the issue of AI. And Juan, I took the liberty to put here a screenshot from a direct message Instagram exchange we had. Don't worry, none of your texts, even though they're all beautiful. This is just a reminder to myself that the next time that I speak to a student body about artificial intelligence, AI, or KI as it's called in Germany, that I want to make one thing very clear, which is that this is not a promotion of AI or a naive, optimistic view on it, right? Because this last symposium that we had at Pratt, which was really wonderful, and I'm very grateful for our institute to host these things. I was actually taken by how open they were to host such a discussion, and I was on a panel with very close friends that are equally critically discussing it, but not in a way of, let's say, out of fear or rejection. And I think that's a little bit of a problem. And I see this especially with the generation of students now, that they either, they're really curious and get into it, or they reject it altogether. And I would like to just say um, that these concerns about AI, they're extremely real. They are to be taken very, very seriously. And I think that they're a central part of the conversation that we have about AI. And that leads me now finally to excerpts of my book. And now I'm going to give you first an overview about something that I refer to as material AI in this context. And maybe I can frame it like this. I'm going to read from the slides, and I have them, on here. We speak all different languages. As you know, English is also not my native language. So I'm going to read out, okay? So here we go. Conversations about AI unfold at a moment of material and ecological destabilization. Though often framed as immaterial or abstract, AI is itself materially entangled in these systems and in their destabilization. I'm talking about the global warming, the ecological crisis that we're in, but really the point is that AI is not an abstract, but a material thing. This work advances a material argument about AI, not as abstract intelligence, but as material intelligence. Cognition, including the artificial kind, does not float above matter. It is inseparable from material processes. So this argument I developed through three domains, and maybe that too is a radical position. I don't know. I don't think, I hope not, but that these are the three domains that really constitute architecture, right? I too, like you guys, come from a country where, in academic context, architecture is considered primarily a profession, and therefore architecture education, a professional preparation for the practice of design and building. One thing that actually brought me to the United States is that here, there's a little bit of an understanding that it is also an academic endeavor in its own right, and therefore theory has a place too. Of course, that's true everywhere, and I'm probably exaggerating when I say so that it's less so in the European context. But Juan might agree with me that this is something that was given a little bit more room at the American university than perhaps at most European university, though this might have changed, like maybe this is not the case. All I'm saying is that I want to try to see the technical, the theoretical, and the design as equal components, right? Like you guys, you are the technical school, right? Technical university. I too was originally trained at such in Darmstadt. So I do know the engineering mindset very well. And I think that's probably what I always come back to, because that was my original training. On the other side, I have really come to appreciate the theoretical dimension of architecture. And with theory, I don't only mean like building history, but that what I was trying to frame here, maybe with the first domain. which is theory. Much of modern thought operates through dualities: mind and matter, nature and culture, human and machine, or what Donna Haraway calls the maze of dualisms through which we explain the world and our bodies to ourselves. The ecological crisis emerged from us imagining ourselves as outside the systems we inhabit, or that what we call nature. If we now position AI as tool, threat, captor, or savior, we risk reproducing that same structure. A material perspective refuses the idea that intelligence floats above matter. It treats cognition as emerging through entanglement distributed across bodies, environments, infrastructures, and technical objects. Second, technology. Classical computation was symbolic and binary. It modeled itself on language. It rendered reality into binary structures and deterministic trees. Much of late 20th century's thinking reinforced this through the hardware-software split. The idea that intelligence is abstractable from its substrate, that separation cannot be sustained. Intelligence is always already embodied. Contemporary AI systems operate differently. They are probabilistic in nature, navigate latent spaces, and require sources of randomness. In most current systems, including diffusion models, the noise driving the process is generated algorithmically, which is essentially a pseudo-randomness. Yet genuine randomness ultimately derives from physical processes, and emerging AI developments increasingly turn to material itself as a source of entropy. In a related and parallel development in quantum computation, the bit is no longer simply on and off. The qubit fluctuates. The computational base At the computational base, abstraction and substrate are no longer cleanly separable. The production of intelligence here becomes inseparable from the dynamism of matter itself. Third, design. Architecture is constituted through the convergence of theory, technology, and design. These domains are often separated and treated in isolation. In our studios, we work towards re-entangling them. Design unfolds as a material discursive practice. This is a term that I borrow from Karen Barat, where matter and meaning, thinking and making are inseparable. Within this, AI systems, robotic fabrication, and physical material experiments are entangled in feedback loops. Material responses inform computation, computation informs fabrication, fabrication re-enters material. The idea of embodied intelligence is not new. Alan Turing already imagined a machine that learns like a child through sensory engagements with the world. What interests me is not the fantasy of an autonomous abstract mind, but the possibility of a machinic material intelligence, systems that designers collaborate with and are shaped by as much as they shape them. To put it all briefly, this intro, in a climate oscillating between existential fear and naive optimism, we need another plane of engagement, not outside, not above, but within. And I'll show you a couple of examples of that design part, the oscillating, the back and forth, the looping process, if you will, between material, AI, machine, human designers. Currently, these are separate steps, just out of necessity and where we are with our technological development. But I'm pretty sure that soon these will be merged in a comprehensive process. Currently, the robot plays a pretty important part as an intermediary between the computational AI systems and the physical, the material intelligence, if you will. A couple of examples. The top part is from a paper at Arcadia, when Arcadia was hosted at Penn University a couple of years ago, together with James Nanaska and Ezio Blasetti, friends and colleagues of mine. We started with subvisible objects from a research project that I've been running for many years called Nanotectonica. We have a large archive of subvisible scanning electron microscopy images. And what we did in this project was creating basically a process chain between SEM, what then was the current AI, which was GAN, generative adversarial networks, and incremental metal forming, robotic fabrication. So you see on the top left this huge robotic arm, and I don't have an image here now of the electron microscope, but that is essentially doing the same thing at a different scale. So here it's very obvious the relationship between the material, the artificial, and the human engagement. At the bottom, you see examples from our studios, and this is you see here the robotic arm pushing paint over the canvas, and then the structures emerging, mapped into back into drawings, and the drawings engaging with the designers on the side. This work was exhibited at the Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism in Seoul, South Korea, a couple of years ago, 2023. And here are other examples from more recent studios. I think we have one student in the audience who actually was involved in this. Anthony, if you're there, that's on the top right, his work, and on the top left by Stephen, and on the bottom by Kaz. All of these were from one studio just last spring. On the top left, it's with basically with ferromagnetic effects and robotic fabrication. On top right, in Anthony's work, one of the examples where we were engaging with geometry AI. One critique that the book elaborates is that of image AI, the exclusive focus in the design disciplines on the image. And we try very much with current available platforms to go deeper into tectonic, morphological, geometric, fundamentally architectural conditions, as I find. While the image AI is opening, or has opened, a lot of, let's say, theoretical new ideas and discourse around aesthetics, which is all good, and I think has propelled the discourse in some way. I think in other ways it's quite limiting to consider AI only as a form of image production. So you see here on the top right, it starts with a physical model, and then not an image, but a geometric mapping, and then also a form of positive hallucination, if you will. So you understand these reconstruction engines in AI that they have now, which basically map a physical object into 3D geometry. They differ from, and they infer from, a large set of geometries that they're trained with. So in a certain sense, you can argue that you're sharing a much larger mind. These geometries also ultimately are created by humans to then infer geometries and morphologies onto the physical object that aren't necessarily inherently present into it. So you see here an example of that shift on the top right, and also a final model by Anthony. On the bottom left, you see by Kaz, and we've been working with this for a number of years now. You guys are all familiar, I'm sure, with the catenary curves, the things that both Gaudi and Frei Otto have been doing so beautifully. And so this is sort of the idea that this is already a material agency. I don't see any other way of thinking about catenary curves as a material physical computation to begin with. But we bring in the computer on, and I'm sorry, the robot on the one side, which is the extrusion of the plastics. So the tool path is produced by us, and then the geometry that comes out in its first instance is actually a function of the physical material optimization, if you want to use that word, a la Frei Otto. And then what you see on the bottom right is we're working with these AI engines to further, once the human and the material intelligence already is unfolding through these inference that I was just describing of these geometric AI models, we try to open up the process and perhaps discover new avenues of design. Here's another example. Um, the top right is in a similar vein, relating thread models, also a kind of a process associated with Frei Otto's work, and various other physical models, ice models, which is something more coming from or inspired by Heinz Isler, the Swiss engineer, who's been dipping cloth in freezing it and turning it around and creating this beautiful, mostly gas station covers with this super, super thin concrete shells. So we teach this always in January when it's really cold in New York. So students were working with these kinds of very physical techniques, but then they move it in the AI domain. And on the left side, you see a specific industry-specific AI model called Forma by Autodesk, which just came out when we started using it a couple of years ago. It works with basically urban massing. It's one of those AI models that are, yes, unlike the image AIs, very much, let's say, in touch with the morphology and geometric principles that come straight out of conventional architectural thinking. And in that regard, quite meaningful in the early stages of urban design and urban housing. However, they seem a little bit close still, in my mind, to the parametric engines that we are all familiar with, that we've been working with for perhaps the last 25 years. And I do want to make the distinction, and the book does that very clearly, between the parametricism, to borrow the word by Patrick Schumacher, and the potential of AI. Because the parametric engines, they're all directed, and the parameters open up a design corridor, yes, but the boundaries of that design corridor are from the start completely defined, can never leave that corridor, right? So you have variations on a theme, but you won't be able to find new ideas. And I argue that AI is actually fundamentally different, because it does not work in an algorithmic directed sense, but it is, as I mentioned before, it's creating a latent space, and that latent space can be probed, if you will. By the way, Juan, thank you very much for referring to probe. You might be one of the very few people who understood that that was a Deleuzian reference back then when Herman and I had that company. I haven't even thought about that in a long time. But anyway, the latent spaces that are opened up by AI are fundamentally different probe spaces than those by the parametric engines. I would argue that they don't have actually a limit. Theoretically, they don't have a limit because the latent spaces are really an identification of patterns, and these patterns can be infinitely expressed into phenotypical outputs, right? Versus the parametric engines are limited to a finite set of, parameters, right? So this is a long way of saying that we worked with what is currently considered an AI urban design tool, which creates these pristine, very clean geometric objects. And then we move them through a process of 3D print casting, as you see on the bottom, into the messy materiality that I described in the book. Messy as a good thing, as a thing that the material can unfold its own intelligence. And so you see these urban models um, at the bottom left and the bottom right. Youssef created that board on the bottom left. And I think the bottom right is Begimnar. And here we see yet another approach to overcome the dominance of image AI in current architecture discourse and in the design disciplines at large. And we explored the potential being really going back to the roots of architecture and the very disciplinary idea of plan graphics, organization, tectonic elements, structural elements. And we created these housing hybrids and built something which we refer to as the hybrid housing matrix, which is an infinitely expanding set of possibilities. And this is also what's on the cover of the cover of the book is basically an excerpt of these. And your students, I'm sure, are familiar with at least a couple of these floor plans where they might never have seen all of these because these are AI generated, but these you might recognize. Okay, let's move on. So design ontology. The very beginning of the book, it says, let me just read it. This book is about design, and it is about design research too. So when you hear design research, at least in the North American context, one usually thinks about doing research, conducting research into things that then will eventually inform the design. You know, you do historical research, you do environmental research, maybe cultural research or media research, everything that could eventually then be used in the design process. The way that I consider design research in this book is very different. It's about design, meaning the research is into the idea of design. What is design? So that's a ontological question, right? So I want to now move on to the excerpt of the text. Let me look at the time. As we work with these themes of material reality, we encounter fundamental questions about the nature of design itself. How do things come into being? How do they form? How do they individuate? What role do we as architects play in this process? Do we act as planners and constructors and we're imposing form onto passive matter, or as gardeners, seeding, nurturing, and guiding the emergence of structure and form? Do we use tools and devices to author and shape, or do we collaborate with and afford design intelligence to machine and material? I'm going to skip to the rest here in the benefit of time. But here, just a couple of examples from from two classes that I teach, one nanotectonica that I mentioned before, and the other one called What is Design? Really a pet project of my friend Gorkan Koralak and me that we've been working on for 3 years now. It's quite wonderful because it's not only for the students a great experiment and learning experience, but it is also for the two professors, Gorkan and myself. Gorkan is a philosopher and he is I would argue, the premier expert on Spinoza, Baruch Spinoza, in the context of architecture. And we've been developing this seminar as a kind of a jam session where we do very, very, academic and very disciplinary philosophical lectures, most of them by him. I have a couple of them in there, but he's a real philosopher. And we mix it up with very, very experimental material exercises. Now, here the point is not so much to, well, either do two separate things or to have one represent the other, but to consider in this material discursive practice that matter actually and material models can participate in the discourse. That it's not like you discuss something, you design something, then you build it, but that there are moments that actually discuss conceptual phenomena. And here we have a couple of examples. I don't know if you can read that. Well, this is one that works with metallurgy, and on the right side we see crystal growth. So there's a third one that I don't have this slide here, but it's coming up later. Let me just speak to the crystal growth for a second. So this comes from Nanotectonica, actually. So we go to the SEM lab, the scanning electron microscope lab, and students discover something about crystallography and the growth formation of crystals. And we discuss in parallel an alternative model to the classical holomorphic idea. Holomorphic idea, Aristotelian idea from, classical philosophy. On the one side, we have matter. On the other side, we have form, right? And form is always superior to matter. It's something that's so ingrained in our thinking, at least in the West, for the last 2,000 years, and emphasized, by the reign of the Catholic Church and everybody, that flesh is bad and soul is good, thought is good, and stuff is bad. So this is the in a nutshell, and perhaps not the most eloquent way of putting it, but that's the holomorphic model, right? The idea that we impose as designers form onto matter. And the French philosopher Gilbert Simondon develops an alternative model to this. And his idea of individuation, how things come to being, for that he uses or works with the model of crystal growth, right? So that one layer grows from within the material, and then it creates a next layer, and so on. And so that's kind of the counter proposal. So rather than just theoretically discussing this, we go in the lab and we look at those different layers of crystal growth as an example. One more excerpt, and that's only one slide that you find here on page 17 and 18, page 18. In a cultural climate where AI evokes either existential fear or techno-utopian expectation, a position rooted in shared materiality offers an alternative, not a ground, but a new plane of engagement. Rather than framing AI as either captor or savior of humanity, shared materiality positions it as an active participant in a reality not solely centered on human concerns. And I brought up that list of symbols here, and you could argue that too is a more of a political statement, but it really isn't, right? Like, if politics is only something that comes from humans, just like culture, this is something that affects everything. So if we think about shared materiality, we're thinking about a foundational layer that runs through everything, right? Through what we call nature and the atoms and the apples and everything that's involved with it, but also us, right? And I argue also AI. And I think I want to skip forward because I would like to leave a lot of time for discussion. Um, and so I skip to something that's perhaps a little bit more poetic, a way of discussing this shared materiality in a slightly anthropomorphic way. We're trained to stay away from anthropomorphism, to, consider other stuff as human or whatever. And that is something that Jane Bennett in her Vibrant Matter book makes as a point, that it's, even if it's just a crutch or a kind of a dirty bridge, it does help us to step out momentarily of a entirely human-centric position. So I'm reading to you now the cobalt passage, which is an anecdote from the perspective of a cobalt atom. Imagine, if you will, cobalt embedded in the earth mineral currents, shifting with pressures and heat, transforming through deep geological time. Billions of years ago, I was forged in the explosion of a dying star, eventually finding my way into the Earth's forming crust. In planetary cycles, I drifted through slow, continuous exchanges, settling into minerals, dissolving, reforming, then a rupture. Vibrations pulsed through the rock, and the molecular arrangements that structured my existence are forced apart. Torn from the ground, I enter a different trajectory, one of acceleration, separation, and direct transformation. As the mineral I have helped formed is smelted and purified, I am processed into a crucial component of a lithium ion battery, destined to become part of the energy infrastructure in an AI data center. No longer part of the slow passage of geological time, I am folded into circuits of industrial production. Now I facilitate energy flow, releasing and storing changes in continuous cycles. The systems I sustain demand constant input, electricity drawn from grids, resources pulled from across the planet. The currents I now conduct extend outwards, binding me into an expanding network of perpetual extraction and consumption. From the depth of the earth, so this is now a human voice. From the depth of the earth to high-tech data centers, the journey of this atom traces a shared materiality where all entities, human or non-human, are entangled in the fabric of reality. And now what I propose is I can cycle through a few more images. This is the Acadia research paper that we presented with the incremental metal forming and the GANs, the generative adversarial networks. And then maybe I show you the table of contents of the book. So beautiful, I find traceries of the robot in the metal, but the metal responds and it creates this vibrant landscape. I have a video of that, which I should probably drop in the slideshow, where it moves and you can actually feel that this whole thing is alive. These are other examples. This is a project we did in Miami with students, a combination of image AI, robotic fabrication, and some kind of algorithmic work. And then your students could be just looking at the index or the table of content rather, and say which topics they're interested to discuss further. And then I skip to the page. I have all the pages of the book in this slideshow, and then they can pick whatever they're interested in, and we discuss that further. But for the moment, I would take a pause speaking and let the students take over.